More work? No one else available? More work? Righto. Ready to work. All right. Off I go then. More work? All right. Off I go then.
Testing. Finally. What? Stop it. Wait, what the fuck?
More work?
Log out.
I guess I can.
Did I get logged out of fucking Google on this phone? What the hell is going on, dude? This is insane. This is so stupid. Alright.
What? More work? No one else available?
I probably shouldn't tag my YouTube roles in Discord. I'd rather have a president. Chill Walsh is such a joke. I'd rather have a president who calls out dictators than one who fawns over dictators while we're literally doing the bidding of an authoritarian who is actively committing an ethnic cleansing. Beautiful. Just beautiful time. What am I doing? I'm just sitting still in, whatchamacallit. Alright, what am I doing? What am I doing? Oh, right, I'm trying to open up Restream. And it's going very poorly.
Forward.
Google.
Right now.
Session expired. Okay. So I have to log back in to my main email address. Dual push, please. Nice. Bless me. Yes, this is my device. Mother knows best. Mother knows best. Listen to your mumsy. Alright. What are we talking about today? As if we don't already know. What? Oh. Bro, no, stop it. Log in. What? Oh, I have a saved password? Oh, that's the one it just created. You're so stupid. Hold on. I have to fix this. No, delete this password.
Alright. Off I go then.
Why does technology conspire to get as much in the way as possible in like 1 second? Alright. Beautiful. Amazing. Hey, cool, easy, sweet. Now check my chat. Very cool. And we're live on both. Great. So I only have Twitch chat here. I'm just gonna run, I'll just run it on this. Testing sound, 1, 2, 3. Beautiful. Amazing. Hey, cool, easy, sweet. Okay, that's fine. All right. What is happening here? Is my brightness up? Yeah. Do I need to turn my brightness in game up? I'm getting not glare, just my backlight is kind of fucking with yeah. Just make sure that the gamma is not messing with the stream image. All right, whatever. I'll look down later. Cool. Well, so much for this being a speed run. No, it's not. It's not a speed run. Let's get the good news out of the way. Let's all welcome Bernie to as the late comer to the calling for anything remotely humane in Gaza party. Oh, I just wasted my entire Onyxia buff. Oh my god, I'm so stupid. That's fine. I should have logged out. So, Yeah. So like the story with Bernie is clearly that like there is some insane like unconscionable backroom like bullshit going on that like he must have been offered something. And it was just like, "Oh, yeah, you're someone convinced him like you're not going to have any influence in calling for a ceasefire. And if you shut the fuck up and toe the Senate talking points line, shut up. If you like break if you don't break ranks with the rest of the Senate, and of course until Dick Durbin spoke out, there was literally no no senators calling for ceasefire. And even Durbin's call was kind of tepid, but you know, it was still senator calling for a ceasefire, which, you know, we take those. Yeah, it was clear that he was offered something and convinced that like his voice can't do anything about the absolute massacres that took place. And I just don't think that's true. I think that the entire government, like, I think basically the entire U.S. government, or like Biden specifically, and like the State Department, was basically threatened, I imagine, with some form of escalation. That like this is my like conjecture, this is my hypothesis, is that like basically the State Department and the Biden administration were in talks with the Netanyahu government, as I'm sure they have been this entire time. And I have no doubt that behind closed doors they've been trying to urge restraint. Civilian casualties are at something like 14,000 or some fucking shit like that. These murderous fucking bastards. So I'm pretty sure. I imagine what happened was Bibi went to not went to Biden. Bibi was talking to Biden. He was basically like, "Hey, look, if you guys are insistent on calling for a ceasefire, I can't speak for what my military advisors will do, wink, wink. That's a nice civilian population in Gaza. It would be a shame if even more happened to it." And basically made a veiled threat that like the slaughter would be even greater if the U.S. tried to like put pressure on Israel. And so Biden was basically like believed him and was like, I'm gonna be the most feckless, craven collaborationist that I possibly could. And like, look, I'm not going to sit here and say that's 100% a bluff. But what I will say is that there is no circumstance under which Israel would not make that threat. You know, you're coming off, you are in the biggest period of popular bloodthirst, as well as government and military bloodthirst, because like this is a literal fascist military and a, quite frankly, like plurality fascist, if not majority fascist government. It is an extremely right-wing government, a absolutely fascistic military, and quite frankly, a populace that has been extremely propagandized against any semblance of dignity for Palestinian lives. So like this attack was basically, they saw it as carte blanche, I think, to launch a systematic murder and displacement campaign against the Palestinian people. And I don't see, what was I saying? Sorry. Yeah. So like full on, you know, there was an entire military just foaming at the mouth to commit as many murders as possible and basically make North Gaza uninhabitable. Not basically, literally, absolutely, 100% unequivocally, they made North Gaza uninhabitable, right? And now the global community is going to be like, going to insist like we need a humanitarian pause and like drastic humanitarian aid, which is exactly what Bernie's calling for. It's not enough. But that's not the part of the statement that was actually good. Um, yeah, the world's going to call for, like, humanitarian pause and ceasefire, and the world's already calling for ceasefire.
You need something?
And of course, we're not going to get it. They will allow in, like, measured amounts of humanitarian aid, but, like, there is absolutely zero chance that Israel in its current form, under the current level of U.S. and UK government pressure, is going to acquiesce to, like, allowing the kinds of aid that would be required to rebuild northern Gaza and make it inhabitable for the people that have been displaced from it. It's not happening. So the population, like something like 1 million people, maybe 1.1 million Gazans. I don't know if 1.1 million is just like cutting the population in half, or if actually half the population lived in the northern half of Gaza. But, and this is notwithstanding Israel threatening to invade the south, saying like, oh, Hamas fled to the south, and now we're magically discovering Hamas military camps in the one part of the country we haven't bombed. So, like, I don't see a future in which Palestinians are just simply allowed to return, even in the context of a ceasefire. Like, it is going to take a level of international pressure and a reversal of U.S. political support for Israel that just does not exist in its current form. I'm going to switch to... Should I go to podcast and talk show, news and media? I guess we'll do podcast and talk show, because we are talking. So yeah, we'll talk about the state of global popular support for Israel at another time, I guess, or not another time, like probably a bit later in the stream, hopefully, if I'm not like totally, or but let's go to our handy dandy stream window. Yay. Okay, cool. I was just checking if my chat box works. What the hell is this? Why isn't my... All right. Open chat. We'll go over the Bernie press release. Yeah, we'll go over the Bernie press release. What were we saying? Right. So northern Gaza is going to be like completely uninhabitable, and it's going to be a long project of seeking any means to resettling that population. And it's a really sad thing, but obviously, like, what, trying to put this chat window into, okay, whatever. I lost my train of thought. Yeah, so the point here is like, I guess the point I was making was that like, no matter what the so I guess the point I was making as I hide the absolute travesty that is my that is my bed. Wait, let me see. Yeah, there's just all sorts of shit on my bed. I need to. Yeah, I've so much clutter I need to get rid of. Cool. I'm just gonna edit my properties, configure video, and we'll just zoom. Whoa, 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 whoa. Calm down. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So, yeah, as I was saying, there was no situation in which Israel was not going to threaten maximalism in Gaza. There was just no situation, right? So then the calculation for the United States becomes like, are these guys actually making like a threat? Are they actually going to commit serious exterminations? Like, you know, presuming that's the situation. I don't actually know, but like I feel like it's a pretty good guess that like I feel like there's no other reason why even Biden would be so capitulating, right? And then that kind of trickles down where Bernie probably gets a threat of basically, if you speak out against this, you're going to be completely politically isolated. You're going to have absolutely zero political capital power. You know, obviously, Chuck Schumer is an unrepentant like defender of like everything Israel has been doing for the past like month and a half. I mean, I don't know his record on Israel, but like he is part of a political culture in New York. He comes from a political culture in New York where, you know, there was absolute lockstep support, right? Gillibrand as well, right? Gillibrand's a bit younger, but Gillibrand's very much a part of that era in New York politics, right? And that's an era that's only changing with like the younger millennials, not counting, of course, you know, pieces of shit like Richie Torres and Dan Goldman. But I don't think Dan Goldman's a millennial. I'm pretty sure it's Gen X. Let me just look it up actually. 47. Yeah. He's Gen X. Yeah. So like I can only imagine that like Bernie is under a lot of political pressure to stay silent and has been both threatened and given something big political. And like I think it's a real shame. I think it's extremely appalling. He has a few years left in the Senate, and it feels apparent to me that he traded in the chance to boost the influence of an extremely popular, like broad-based democratic grassroots movement, and basically like forego any chance that his voice could help a movement prevent or mitigate a genocide in order to achieve domestic political goals. And I think that there was probably some element of self-delusion or a political calculation that I quite frankly find to be psychotic. Not psychotic, sorry. That I quite frankly find to be detached from the basic fundamental empathy that should inform the values of someone like Bernie. And I think that's pitiful, and I think that's just awful. So yeah, absolutely, Bernie deserves to be criticized. Not only criticized, like just like this is such a mark. This is such a taint on his legacy of like, this is the guy who like showed up in 2020 on a presidential debate stage and was the only person saying that like, if Israel's not going to respect the human rights of Palestinian people, then they should send back the money that we send them every year. Like that was the moral clarity that he brought to the 2020 stage. And for him to be so equivocal over the past month and a half is inexcusable. And what's really sad is that if at some point in the next like 3 months or 12 months there is some like major piece of legislation that, or not legislation, or like I think probably what was promised to him. I wouldn't be surprised if like the labor lawyer that was appointed to the federal bench was part of that deal. That like if he was promised like a series of like judicial appointments that were just extremely good for labor, I feel like that could easily be like the deal that was made, that Biden made with him, was just like, I will appoint, X number of like extremely pro like labor friendly judges to the bench, but you have to shut the fuck up. You have to not call for a ceasefire, right? And then it was followed by like tepid calls for respecting the rights of Palestinians, while Israel was clearly demonstrating that it gives zero shits about it. And then obviously like convincing him enough, and it's all like you got to massage in the point, right? It's all social engineering, right? You convince a person that they don't have the influence, and quite frankly, like no one is more gullible and malleable than somebody who is in a position of power and has a big incentive to convince themselves that they cannot do the thing that would require them to make a big political sacrifice, right? Like I feel like that's exactly the point where like consultants get in your ear, or like adversarial political allies, adversarial political contemporaries and people like that. Like that feels like the moment where like there's a million different considerations that Bernie has going on in his head, and the basic concept of like this is my last term in the Senate. This is my last term as the era defining progressive politician. Do I really want to spend it enabling genocide, right? And that's a basic question that gets obfuscated in all of these calculations, I'm sure, and in all of like the buzz and all of this stuff. And what's really sad is that like any kind of like legislation or judicial appointments or federal appointments that happen over the next 6 months that are abnormally progressive, that may have been part of whatever calculation was made or whatever negotiation was made between Biden and Bernie, is ultimately going to be tainted by the knowledge or suspicion that it was at the cost of his silence at the mass murder of 14,000 civilians. And that's really sad. But that said, he has now come out and called for things that are more aggressive than a ceasefire, despite still not having called for a ceasefire. Like the logic behind it just baffles me. But he has, after a fashion, called for an end to. He has, after a fashion, called for an end to the atrocities taking place. So let me open up Microsoft Edge. We'll take a look. Who died? Whatever. We'll look at it later. Ooh, nice. So let's read the statement. I took a glimpse at it before. Whoa, that's a big... All right. Whatever. This is scuffed, but who cares? The Netanyahu government, or hopefully a new Israeli government, must understand that not one penny will be coming to Israel from the U.S. unless there's a fundamental change in their military and political positions. I think this is also a horrific choice that Bernie made, where he was basically like, I can't do anything to stop this massacre. So instead, I'm just going to use it to make the point I've been making for years, which is just twisted and psychotic and just like by its nature, it's pure evil. I understand the logic that goes into it, but like, I just cannot. I don't know. There has to be the fact that Bernie has said and done so little that I disagree with, that I even disagree with, let alone find abhorrent, that this is something that's so like aberrantly awful that like I've I've genuinely got to wonder if like he was fucking like someone physically threatened his family or some shit, because like this is insane. But you know, I think I think he basically made a calculation that is absolutely twisted and decided I'm simply going to politicize the deaths that do occur because I don't think I can stop the deaths from happening. Which in the occasion that like it's, you know, you have the crystal ball and it's guaranteed that you can't stop the deaths from happening, yes, you should politicize them. Of course. He had been trying his entire modern day career, like his entire post Bush Obama era career to make, you know, whatever movement he can on reversing the tide of support for Israel. But like it's finally changing and he was nowhere to be seen, right? But he had spent his entire life doing that. But it's like, you know, if there's anybody who actually used their power throughout the course of their 21st century career to try to prevent what is currently happening in Gaza from happening, it is Bernie Sanders. So like, of course he should politicize the deaths, but he doesn't have a crystal ball. He doesn't know that his voice would not have been influential, right? He convinced himself. He was obviously, you know, goaded and threatened and probably tempted with some political kickbacks, not kickbacks, but like some political, you know, political quid pro quo. I imagine, you know, judge appointments and stuff like that. But like, he convinced himself that he had no influence, and I don't think anybody has enough information to tell him definitively enough that that's the case, that he had any business being silent on this. Anyway, Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, today released the following statement calling for the conditioning of U.S. aid to Israel amidst the growing crisis in Gaza and the West Bank. Hamas is a corrupt terrorist organization which began this war by slaughtering 1,200 innocent Israeli men, women, and children and taking over 200 hostages. Hamas has made clear before and after October 7th that its goal is to destroy Israel. Under those circumstances, Israel absolutely has the right to defend itself. Now, like, I condemn Hamas. I condemn Hamas. Great, awesome. Like, yeah, fuck Hamas. But like, you know, also like, I don't like, this is all like service that you essentially have to do as a senator. It's just you have to preface every statement you say. Yeah, I just don't like the phrase right to defend itself. I think it is at this point a codified dog whistle for the wholesale slaughter of Palestinians. But also like, I guess Bernie has like the cred to be like, obviously that's not what I'm talking about. But I think progressives should stay away from that phrase and say other things. You know, under those circumstances, Israel obviously Israel obviously should and is obligated to protect its citizens from terrorist attacks, right? And that also gives you the in to say, like, maybe Israel's job isn't to, you know, go into Gaza and massacre people, but like literally like protect their borders instead of using the IDF to help a bunch of like religious supremacists kick Muslims out of their houses and beat the shit out of them and shoot them in the head and all sorts of fucked up shit that is going on in the West Bank, where Hamas is not a factor. There is no Hamas in the West Bank. I mean, like there's Hamas everywhere, but like there's absolutely no power holding semblance of Hamas in the West Bank, and yet the ethnic cleansing continues, right? There isn't the excuse just does not hold, right? But they send IDF into the West Bank to help settlers beat the crap out of, murder and evict and displace Palestinians, you know, as much as they humanly can. And there were too many IDF soldiers in the West Bank, and there were none there protecting the fucking border, which is how like paragliders were able to come in and kill 1,200 innocent people. Those deaths are as much on Israel's on Israel's hands as on Hamas's. Maybe not quite as much because, you know, obviously Hamas pulled the trigger. But Bibi is responsible, and if you ask like the families of like the wounded and dead and like kidnapped Israelis, like they will agree 100%. Not all of them, but like, you know, most of them, or not most of them. I can't say most of them, but like there is a there is a general consensus in like the public in the front facing like families of those affected by the 10/7 attacks that like they blame the Israeli government just as much as they blame, which is a huge like compare that to 9/11, where like there was an institutional failure on the part of the US government and still the entire American people rallied around Bush as if he was some kind of hero because he didn't like he didn't trip and fall on the rubble. There is something encouraging about that like there is no rallying around the government. There is a clear understanding that like, no, this was an institutional failure. This is not just an institutional failure. This was an ideological failure on the part of our government. And clearly Likud cares more about its ethno-nationalist goals of establishing supremacy over an oppressed population than they actually do about protecting the fucking civilians that they think are supreme, which we will get to later about what ethno-nationalism really is about. And it's not about defending the civilians in your population. It's really about establishing status and establishing superiority. Anyway, while Israel has the right to go after Hamas, what was my point? Yeah, you have to denounce Hamas before doing anything. And yeah, he should have used different language. Israel absolutely has the right and obligation to protect its civilians from terrorist attacks, which can pivot to border security. While Israel has the right to go after Hamas, Netanyahu's right-wing extreme government does not have the right to wage almost total warfare against the Palestinian people. That is morally unacceptable and in violation of international law. See, like, a ceasefire is entirely implied here. I feel it feels like he signed a contract or swore like a blood oath that like if he says the word ceasefire, his like the Raiders of the Lost Ark face melting thing will happen to him, because he's in essence calling for a ceasefire here. Like to say that like there is no right for Netanyahu's right-wing extremist government to be doing what it is doing now, like that is morally unacceptable in violation of international law, displacing 1.6 million people from their homes, cutting off so that's the majority of the Gazan population. Cutting off food, water, medical supplies, and fuel, and killing some 12,000 Palestinians, nearly half of whom are children, is in violation of every code of human decency. It must stop. That's like, yeah, I'm so confused. I'm so bewildered by like this whole thing. The U.S. provides $3.8 billion a year to Israel, and the Biden administration wants $14.3 billion more. The Netanyahu government, or hopefully a new Israeli government, must understand that not one penny will be coming to Israel from the U.S. unless there's a fundamental change in their military and political positions. Among other conditions that must be imposed upon any aid to Israel are an end to the indiscriminate bombing, which has taken thousands of civilian lives, and a significant pause in the military operations so that massive humanitarian assistance can come into the region. Like, yeah, this seems like a balking answer, but like the idea that like there is any form of ethical warfare that the Netanyahu government would ever wage against Gaza, like this is effectively saying that like there is nothing from this government that would be acceptable, right? There's nothing this government would do that really would strike us as acceptable. So like, I don't know, there's a lot of equivocation here, and I don't like it, but I don't know, whatever. It's a good statement overall. The right of displaced Gazans to return to their homes, of course, but like let's talk about that. No long-term Israeli reoccupation or blockade of Gaza, an end to settler violence in the West Bank, and a freeze on settlement expansions. Okay. A commitment to broad peace talks for a two-state solution cringe in the wake of the war. All right. So this is a good statement because it's coming from a senator, right? And it also, like, compared to the absolute dog shit Bernie was putting out before, it's an improvement. It's a step in the right direction. There's a few things wrong with the statement, obviously. Like, I just think right to defend itself is a dog whistle, and you shouldn't engage with it as a progressive senator. But I can also imagine, like, that was also part of the deal, that, like, he has to say Israel has the right to defend itself, which, again, is, at this point, a cryptic way, a thinly veiled signal of basically saying, like, because of the way it's used, like, Israel has a right to defend itself is a phrase that almost always means Israel has a right to commit a wholesale slaughter of Palestinians, right? And, like, so after 10/7, like, do I think that Israel should have done nothing? Probably not. Like, yes, if you're a colonizing force, if you are the colonizing force, if you are the force that is committing the absolute lion's share of atrocities and human rights violations and massacring civilians, like mowing the lawn, as they call it, putting them on a diet, committing war crimes left and right, like, yes, you have the obligation of restraint when you are attacked in return. I do believe in the right to resist. Absolutely. I believe in the right to resist occupation. I believe in the right to resist settler colonial violence. I do not believe in the right to slaughter non-combatants. So killing 1,200 innocent Israeli men, women, and children, and the other atrocities that have now been corroborated to have occurred, which, by the way, a bit of a tangent. If you ever find yourself purporting to die on the Hill that a military or militant force went into a civilian population, killed a bunch of people, and you find yourself dying on the Hill of claims, like if you see claims that like those militants or those terrorists or those military members, no matter whom, any combatant, if any combatant force goes into a civilian population and commits murders, it is like inevitably guaranteed 100% that rapes have happened. Like rape is it's just, I'm sorry, like sexual assault and rape are like an inevitable, like are not inevitable. Inevitable is just a bad word. Are just like, they are a constant and guaranteed part of when you have a psychotic attack in which combatants slaughter non-combatants. Like, rapes will happen. Because at that point, you are talking about a military force or a combatant force that that does not consider the basic humanity of the people that they're attacking. This happens in every single like military conflict. Like this is part of why war is such a fucking atrocity. Is that like there are things about war that will always happen that you cannot prevent. And if you choose to wage a war, you are choosing a scenario in which you are allowing rape to happen. You are condoning, you are sanctioning the instance of rape. Like, so like, if you chose to die on the Hill that like rapes didn't happen during the Hamas attack, you're fucking delusional and you're an idiot. Now there is a valid critique that unfounded claims of like particularly heinous and like graphic depictions of sexual assault that were made by hearsay and made by people who were not witness to the attack, allegations that had no basis and no foundation, that were placed in the center, particularly with the goal of framing the attack as something deserving of an equally barbaric response. Those are things that can be criticized in terms of you are clearly centering this thing that always happens in terrorist attacks, always happens in war, as a pretext to very clearly cheerlead a massacre in response. There's a valid criticism to be made there. But if you are someone who like tries to get on the train of like, oh yeah, like I just don't believe any rapes occurred, like I'm sorry, like you need to have your head examined, or you just entered into this like contrarian delusion, and you should never have argued that. Again, like there is nothing that Hamas did or could have done that justifies what has happened in Gaza since. Nothing. There is nothing that needs to be defended or truthered or doubted. Just accept the inherent nature of the moral high ground here. Of like, collective punishment is not okay. War crimes are not okay. Cutting off communications, cutting off internet is not okay. And by not okay, I mean literally fucking genocidal, right? And there is enough evidence that enough of the IDF is not waging a war against Hamas, but against the Palestinian people. There's enough evidence out there. Stop arguing that a right-wing fundamentalist group that attack non-combatants and killed 1,200 of them and took 200 of them hostage, like, is like above committing an atrocity that every single combatant force does in every single conflict situation, right? And once again, the caveat of, like, yes, you should absolutely criticize the attempts to position and posture, like, Palestinians as, like, bloodthirsty savages, but that's about the framing of the issue, right? The next critique I have: Israel has the right to go after Hamas. Like, yeah, like, so going back to it, do I think Israel should have done nothing? Probably not. I'm sure that there was some response that would have been appropriate. I imagine that an appropriate response is one that none of us would ever have heard about. Like, you have access to the most sophisticated military technology in the world. And don't let anyone ever pull you into the, well, what should they have done instead? Can you tell me what the appropriate response would have been? Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to play on your lack of military knowledge when there's a basic moral clarity of, like, if your options are do nothing and kill 14,000 civilians just so that you can kill 60 Hamas, like, higher-ups, there's no scenario in which it's acceptable to kill 14,000 civilians. You've got to find another way, right? And there is another way. They have access to the highest technology, highest tech military weaponry on the face of the planet. On the face of the fucking planet. There was no need to kill 14. The only reason that 14,000 civilians are killed in that scenario, 6,000 or something children? The only way in which each one of those, by the way, every life is a fucking universe. Can we understand that? Every life is a fucking universe, right? I cannot conceive of the entirety of my own existence. There is so much in my life that I cannot deal with. As is the case with anybody who's remotely self-aware. Your life is so much for you to handle. Like, every single 6,000 of those as children. 14,000 entire cosmic existences. Like, I don't want to get too super woo-woo, like, it's not mystical, but, like, I don't want to get super spiritual right now. But, like the sheer scale of that, like, how can that not affect you? How can that not horrify you? So yes, when, like, 14,000 entire cosmos of existence, people, stories, lives, relationships, hopes, dreams, loves, heartbreaks, worries, concerns, fears. Every single person had their own unique fears, their own unique relationships, their own unique love stories, their own unique, like, relationships with the world. So yes, if the choice is do nothing and wipe out 14,000 innocent people, yeah, you do nothing. But that's not the choice. They could have easily have, like, taken out, like, 20 to 30% of, like, the Hamas officers they took out using fucking Mossad or some shit. Like, some whatever black ops shit that they have access to. The reason they didn't is very simple. It is their goal to continue to immiserate and continue to slowly ethnically cleanse anybody who they find to be interfering with the ultimate goal of Likud, which is in their founding charter, that, like, you know, they have literally said from the Jordan River to the everywhere from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea will be under Israeli sovereignty, right? Like, Likud has an ethno-state, one-state solution. That is their founding goal. So, like, when they show you who they are and what they want, fucking believe them. You've got to believe them. So yeah, so when someone says what should they have done in response, all you have to say is, that's not my purview. What I know is there is absolutely no scarcity of possible responses that justifies this. If the only other option is do nothing, that is the more moral option. If only because A, you're never going to wipe out Hamas because their leadership is in other countries. Why are you not sending? Why are you not? Your money is better spent if you actually want to wipe out Hamas. Your money is better spent sending Mossad to Qatar, right? You're sending agents. I'm sure there are agents in Qatar, in Qatar, but I don't imagine that they're actually. I don't imagine that Likud is interested in wiping out Hamas. Why would they be? If they do, some other group is going to take its place. I'm not familiar with the geopolitics. I don't know what Hezbollah's ambitions or whatever are. But Islamic Jihad still exists, right? They take out Hamas, even if they take out Islamic Jihad. The radicalism that exists from the amount of carnage they have wrought is going to create another anti-Israel insurgency, right? But they maintain Hamas because Hamas is a more destabilizing force. The worst thing that they could get is a group that wants to absolutely destroy Israel and kill Israelis, but also actually cares about the Palestinian cause, and is more interested in the liberation of Palestine than they are in the death of Israeli people. Right? That is their nightmare. So of course they're going to keep Hamas situated. This is not a faction that cares about civilian lives. And this is the thing that people have to understand. Fascists and ethno-supremacists don't care about the people from their ethnic group. They don't care about individuals. What they care about is supremacy. What they care about is status. What they care about is superiority, right? This is why if let's take India for an example. Let's say caste as an example. This is why, whether it's a son or a daughter, the rural caste norms say that if your son or daughter elopes and marries outside of their caste, then in so many different Hindu societies, the prescription is that you have to honor kill them. Your own child, right? You have to kill your child because they have brought shame and dishonor upon your family, and you have to erase that stain. Because ultimately, because their genetic supremacy, the genetic supremacy of an upper caste of whatever Brahmin or Kshatriya caste that your ass comes from, that supremacy purportedly exists. That it's still genetically there in the child, but the fact that child transgressed means that the transgression has to be punished. That's the more important part. Ethnic, caste, religious supremacy exists purely through the primary goal, the primary MO of punishing transgression. Of any situation, any collusion, any person who is complicit in allowing a downtrodden society or a downtrodden people to transcend whatever their political status was assigned as, that person is a threat to the system, to the order, right? That is what's most important, is maintaining the order, the natural order. What is important is maintaining the hierarchy. So why the fuck would a fascist military care about releasing hostages? Why would they care? Their job is to punish the Palestinian people for transgressing the social order that has been set, right? And that's not a justification of the manner in which they transgressed. It's not a justification of the attack. Of course not. It's not a justification of taking hostages. But my point is that those hostages deserve a government that is actually interested in getting them back. that hasn't been fucking bombing the locations where they suspect they are for the past 6 weeks, which is what they've been doing. They have been bombing locations in which hostages are suspected to be held. And they have said outright, our priority is not the safe return of hostages, it is the eradication of Hamas, which is not going to happen. It has never happened. There has never been an Israeli military incursion that did significant damage to Hamas. And, like, there never will be. They're not one in Gaza, at least. It's not going to happen. They have no regard for the lives of their hostages. But they will continue to use them as a political tool for manufacturing consent for the carnage. It's really just that simple, right? Like, fascists do not care about protecting the people, and in fact, like isn't that the whole like talking point that super far right Zionists will say of like, you know, they engage in like that dumbass like Darwinist shit about like, you know, Jews, Jewish victims of the Holocaust should have fought back, right? They died because they were weak. It's that strongman shit. It's the same thing, right? Like, the point is, like, if you are someone who gets killed, there is a Darwinism to it. If you're someone who gets kidnapped, there's a Darwinism to it. We cannot sacrifice the broader project in order to protect you. Ultimately, the broader project, the more important thing in order to protect the supremacy of Israeli Jews, is to punish the transgression, right? The 200 people are dispensable to Israel. The hierarchical position is not. The caste position is not. They failed to protect the border, and so they have to make it up by punishing the transgression. It doesn't matter that the transgression came from, you know, a militant group. It doesn't matter that it came from a terrorist group, right? It came from the ethnic group, so the ethnic group has to be punished. This is the same shit. This is the same shit that India did to the Sikh community after a member of the Khalistani Liberation Movement killed Indira Gandhi. Hold on, I have to triple check that because my India knowledge is it's from adulthood, so I'm like 90% sure she was killed by Yeah, because that was why they were that's why they were like forcibly sterilized, right? Or no, they were being forcibly sterilized during emergency or some shit. And then they were also like forcibly sterilized afterward. There was like a massive oh, here it is, contents. Dude, the new Wikipedia format is actually like so based, but I'm so used to two of Gandhi's Sikh bodyguards. I wasn't sure if the bodyguards thing was Rajiv Gandhi or Indira Gandhi. So like, yeah, like the massive collective punishment of Sikh Indians when 2 Sikh bodyguards assassinated Indira Gandhi as ostensibly as revenge for her policies during the emergency of forcibly sterilizing members of the Sikh community, like that, it was punishment of transgression, right? It happens all over India. The same thing applies in Sri Lanka, right? The Buddhist majority in Sri Lanka, the Sinhalese Buddhist majority in Sri Lanka, has routinely committed ethnic cleansings and acts of genocide, generally against the broader Tamil population. And oftentimes it was in direct retaliation for successful militant attacks by the LTTE, the Tamil Tigers, the Lankan Tigers of Tamil Eelam. The Tamil Tigers would carry out successful attacks, and then the punishment would be severe, and it would be on the broad Tamil population. The point is to punish transgression. That is the point of any apartheid state that like commits atrocities against people after a terrorist attack. It is collective punishment. Collective punishment is a vessel for the disciplining of a people, the enforcement of a social order. That's the point of collective punishment. The interest is not in the protection of your people. Israel has a right, like nominally, yes, Israel has a right to defend itself, like in terms of like Yeah, but the right to defend yourself is to protect your fucking border. It's not to go in and slaughter tens of thousands. You're making Israelis less safe. I keep forgetting like what I was talking about. This is like the most ADHD stream format I've ever that has ever existed. All right. Let's talk about the big one. A commitment to broad peace talks for a two-state solution in the wake of war. The wake of the war. This is always bad. The two-state solution is completely dead. Now, there's an argument to be made that a one-state solution, a one-state democratic solution, is even less viable. I just don't see that argument. I don't see a way in which a two-state solution... I don't see any way in which a one-state solution is not viable, in which a two-state solution is not almost as unviable, but also completely untenable without a level of global geopolitical involvement, at which point you might as well make it one state. You would basically have to, a militarized United Nations force would have to essentially take complete administrative control of the entire broad region of historical Palestine. Historical Palestine, Eretz Israel, like that entire region would have to be administered by a global peacekeeping force, right? UN peacekeepers. And broadly, like the lion's share of which would be U.S. military. Because that would be the only way that you can get hundreds of thousands of illegal settlers to vacate the level of land that you would need to vacate in order to restore 67 borders. And a two-state solution without 67 borders is fundamentally, like, it is not only just unjust, it is an insult and just a codification of ethnic cleansing against the Palestinian people that has been occurring for the past 40 years or 55 years, right? So, like, restoring 67 borders is borderline impossible. And the level of resources that it would take to actually do it, like, you think, like, hundreds of thousands of settlers are going to give up their homes? No. The only solution is urbanist. Like, you have to create a right of return. You have to create pockets of concentrated land back for Palestinians. And you know, things like, immediately instituting citizenship for Palestinian civilians. Probably you would have to create like ethnic you would have to create like a Senate style but like caucus system, the way that India like tried half-assedly to do, which was creating like specific specific voting caucuses, not caucuses, but like members of a parliamentary body who specifically were representing downtrodden communities in the regions that they came from, right? So basically parliamentary reservations. And you would have to do that for both Israeli Jews and for Palestinians. I feel like you would have to do that. I feel like it would be like just a massive binational secular system. Like, probably not super dissimilar to the way that Belgium is, but like I don't know enough about it to like talk too much about it. But like you cannot redraw the partition. Like, you cannot redraw Balfour lines. You cannot restore 67 borders. It's not going to happen. But like I said, the level of resources that it would take, you might as well do the one state. At least that's the read I have. I'm by no means an expert, but like, I just don't see how you get hundreds of thousands of settlers to give up their land. Like, it's not going to happen. Like, the solution has to be more holistic and more urbanist. You're going to have to upzone giant parts of Israeli cities, and you're basically going to have like reserved housing, like build big pockets of reserved housing in which you are going to and specifically with the intent of right of return, right? where you are going to resettle Palestinians who are historically from the cities from which they've been expelled. Resettle, honestly, also resettle Israeli settlers whom you're also going to have to, like, you know, buy land back from, forcibly remove from their houses. Like, you're going to have to take people who have illegally settled on stolen Palestinian land, and you're going to have to resituate them also in, like, new housing in the cities. Because, like, yeah, there's no reality in which, like, Israelis and Palestinians are not going to have to figure out a way to share that land. I mean, there's one reality, and in that reality, I don't see either country surviving. It's man, it's really scary. But also at the same time, I do not and cannot and have no reason to expect a U.S. senator, even Bernie Sanders, to break the ice on the legislative ice on a two-state on saying, like, two-state solution is not going to work, right? There's no one in the Senate who's going to say that. I just don't think that pressure is, you know, if it comes from anywhere in the legislative body, it's going to come from Congress, not Congress, from the House of Representatives. It's going to come from the House of Representatives. But I think long before that, first there's going to be a public consensus. There's going to be a, like, understanding among the public that, like, we're done trying to ethno-steer our way out of this, right? It was a disaster for India and Pakistan. It was a disaster for Israel and Palestine. It has been a disaster in every experiment that has ever been done, right? Like, Kurdistan, it won't work, right? Like, even in that situation, like, obviously there is a situation in which you need to create a separate, independent nation, quasi-state that is able to operate separately from the ethno-states that are trying to mass murder those groups. But even those are not definitionally ethno-states. They are functionally places in which people can separate in order to be safe, whilst a more permanent solution and evening out of, like, or correction for the sentiments that are causing them to be, like, expelled or whatever, or causing them to have to, like, self-emancipate. Like, yes, of course, that's a thing that has to happen. But even those are not really ethno-states, right? Like, I don't, there's nothing I've read about Rojava that's, like, meant to be a Kurd-only nation. But I could be talking out my ass there, so. But, like, everything I've read about Rojava is that it's largely a left experiment, right? Like, ultimately, like, ethno-states don't work. And, like, this has gone far enough that, like, the only way to fix it is the abolition of the borders themselves. There has to be a mechanism in which Israeli and Palestinian children grow up with each other. They have to be around each other, right? That has to be normalized. The complete cultural, social integration of these cultures. Because the atomization doesn't work. You're just going to have a border on both sides of which you're going to have India, Pakistan again. You're just going to have this border, and you know, everyone being afraid of each other and continuing to fester in their hatred for each other, right? And, like, one side has all of the power and all of the institutional backing and all of the global international backing and you know, proxy veto power in the United Nations. Like, I don't see how that doesn't just turn into the same shit show we've been dealing with this entire time. Without, like I said, the level of resources that you might as well institute an actual democratic solution to the problem, right? Because, like, if you try to do a two-state solution and you invest the kind of resources we would have to invest, there is no exit strategy. That is just, you know, you're going to have settlers trying to continually resettle in the land. And, like, that trauma, I don't think generational cross-cultural conflict trauma can possibly be resolved through segregation. I just don't think it can ever happen. I don't think segregation, like sustained segregation, can never. I'm not talking about like cultural enclaves, right? There will always be cultural enclaves, and there will be in like a binational secular state. But like, you will not ever fix the problems, not fix, but resolve and allow to heal over time the traumas that people hold with each other by segregating them from each other. And I think a huge part of the reason that the Jewish community in New York and DC and Chicago especially, but like urban and metropolitan Jewish communities are so much more divided on the topic of Israel, and why young Jews disproportionately are critical of Israel and stand in solidarity with Palestine, especially in the past year, especially in the past 2 or 3 years since the pandemic hit. I think a big part of the reason for that is just there is an inherent cultural integration that occurs, a cross-cultural dialogue that occurs. We're talking about like the same shit that like when Ilhan Omar makes an incautious or insensitive statement that might be informed by like latent anti-Semitism, that like the level of dialogue that I'm sure occurs between her and Jewish colleagues that are operating, coming to her in good faith. And then she comes out and says, wow, I actually like, no, I like, that was not what I meant by it. And I like have had very, very long conversations. Like, that's the kind of dialogue that occurs. And like, and not to create false equivalencies between a culturally insensitive statement that has the airs of passive anti-Semitism versus like literal support for ethnic cleansing. But like, there's a level of indoctrination that simply cannot overcome just breaking bread with people, right? This is one of the founding. This is one of the bedrock tenets of Ambedkarism as well. That like one of the best ways to get like Brahmins to oppose casteism is for them to simply share the food of those that they're like. Food segregation is one of the like, and food segregation is social segregation, right? Like the sharing meals with people. This is very sappy, but it's very cheesy. But like sharing meals with people is just like, there are levels of non-understanding and levels of fear that simply cannot sustain the act of sharing a meal with someone, right? Obviously, there is like food hierarchy and casteism prevalent in like vegetarianism in Brahmanism that like, you know, that further feeds onto that. But food segregation is also a form of social segregation, of social stratification, that like you keep groups separate. Keeping groups separate is the number one way to keep them hating each other. Which is part of why I just don't think two-state can work. And I think a lot of people don't think two-state can work. Yeah. And even if 67 borders were viable, I would say like, it's not a solution. You will get some permutation of India-Pakistan. Like, Jerusalem will turn into Kashmir, right? Like, or you will have a perpetual, in perpetuity peacekeeping force without any end to the conflict. The UN would exist in occupied in historical Palestine until the end of fucking time. You have to have mutual cultural assimilation, mutual cultural integration, not assimilation, but integration. They have to live with each other. We all have to live with each other. There's no option. There's no other option. When you choose to live in a way that you convince yourself that you can only survive by wiping someone else out, there is no end to that belief. You will always feel threatened. When you live feeling under threat, that is not a fear that goes away. There is no level of threat that can be eliminated because you have dedicated yourself to the belief that something that is different from you is something to be feared. There is no form of fascism or ethno-nationalism that is not ultimately a death cult. We're seeing that in the Republican Party right now. Because none of these people are pure enough for each other. No one will ever be pure enough for you. But like I said, I don't expect even Bernie, I don't expect a senator to be the one to like break the ice on that. That's going to come from popular support. There's a lot to be hopeful about, especially in the incredible multicultural coalition of like the historical protests. Hundreds of thousands of people at these protests in DC, in New York. I don't know how big the Chicago protest was. I'm sure it was pretty big. I mean, it probably wasn't like, you know, the six figures, but like historically massive protests. And like the non-Palestinian voices is the most diverse group of young people you have ever seen in your life. Like, it's unfathomable how diverse these groups are. You see people from every single section of New York, every single intersection of New York. And it's not just young people. There's an incredibly present and vocal cohort of like 50 to 70-year-old like lifelong New York Jewish ladies who are all wearing like, you know, "This Jew Stands with Palestine" shirts, and they're quite frankly iconic because like they are some of the loudest voices, and not like, and that's like loud in a very, very like positive and wholesome way of like, you know, like problematic progressive aunties, right? Like I walk into like one of there's a Palestinian restaurant in Greater New York that I go to, and like I was there at some point, and there was a couple of middle-aged ladies coming from a protest, and they were both wearing like "This Jew Stands with Palestine" t-shirts. And they were talking to like the person of like the person at the counter, who I'm not sure if like the person was from Palestine, but it was a Palestinian restaurant, and they were just like very like aggressive, like, you know, kind of like the overzealous middle-aged white ally who goes up to like a black person and is like, "I believe Black Lives Matter," right? In this house we believe, right? They were walking "In this house we believe" signs, going up and saying like, "Listen, you know, Bibi's gonna get what's coming to him, and just endure, right? Just endure." It was really heartwarming. It was very problematic. I was just like, just listen, leave her. She's trying to do her job. Just leave her alone. But like, you can't do that because they're like 55 years old and they're doing their best, right? It was really sweet. It was really cute. It was really cringy. It was really problematic. But like, you know, it was, you know, fuck it, we ball. It's such an impressive coalition. There was a call into the Majority Report basically saying like, a kid who was raised Orthodox, or not a kid, he's like in his 40s now, and he said like, when I was in my 20s, I just took a look and I realized I'm so progressive and I'm so left on things, except for Israel, where I disagree with everyone that I agree with on politics. But why does everybody that I agree with on all other politics disagree with me on Israel, who's not an Orthodox Jew? And why is it that the people who agree with me, who aren't Jewish, are all like borderline or actual anti-Semites, right? Like, they support ideologies that are, by sheer implication, anti-Semitic. And there is a point where the guilt by association kind of starts to sink in, where like this is circumstantial, but like it is guilt by association. But like, look at the coalition that stands like with Palestine. We're talking about every human rights organization. We're talking about every medical organization, every single outreach organization, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, like fucking the United Nations, if not for the veto power of the US and like probably the UK. Like, look at that coalition, and then look at like, if you take out Jewish support for Israel from the equation in terms of like accounting for the fact that obviously like Jewish upbringing, especially in the US, especially in the UK, comes with a very, very, very heavy ideological, like there's a strong association, especially in Orthodox communities, of the Jewish identity to Zionism, and that like Zionism and Judaism are, you know, inextricably linked. Like, don't take my word for it. Obviously, like this is just me recounting everything I have heard from like friends from like non-Reformed Jewish communities, non-secular, non-Reformed Jewish communities. But like, so like you take those communities out of the consideration, because you're accounting for the level of indoctrination that might be happening there. That accounts for that, right? Every like non-Jewish group that unequivocally stands with Israel, they're all just right-wingers, and a huge portion of them are just anti-Semites. The it's such a, like, when you look at the bedfellows, when you look at the allies, there's like no, like, notwithstanding the fact that guilt by association is a logical fallacy, but like there's times where it's not. And I can't say that it's not here, but like it is cause for concern when every single disinterested party, when you take all of the disinterested parties and the way that they align, that every single remotely progressive party, every single party that cares remotely about human rights, stands in opposition to Israel. And every single disinterested party that stands with Israel is like inherently right-wing. Not just right-wing, but like usually like very like racist, sexist, misogynist, queerphobic, like the only queerphobic people who support Palestine are like right-wing Islamic fundamentalists. And the only people who are not right-wing, conservative, who aren't right-wing conservative, or also just, you know, like U.S. liberals. Like there is also like just a U.S. political culture, right? We're not American, right? Outside of like the American liberal community, like aside from that, like the intergenerational support for Israel, right? Like they're all right-wingers, right? All right, so anyone who's not like a right-wing conservative or just, you know, hereditarily, you know, stands with Israel. By hereditarily, I'm talking about like Americans, not Jews. I'm talking about Americans who, you know, just inherited that viewpoint because that's just the culture they grew up in, right? Which is the same thing to be said for Jews. Like Jews who are ostensibly progressive, or not ostensibly, but like who do consider themselves progressive, but are also contend with like a level of like childhood ideological upbringing, right? Like indoctrination is what it is. Like those are the only groups that are not like far right that are in support of any of this. God, I fucking like I don't get me wrong. I'm sure there were like valuable things to be said in there, but like my tangents are so fucking frustrating sometimes. There was so much I wanted to get to. There's a level of backlash to the conditioned AIDS stuff. Man, I want to talk about Daniel Goldman. Let's talk about Daniel Goldman. All right. So the Brooklyn office of a New York congressman who is Jewish was vandalized with "Let Gaza Live" and "Free Palestine" and "Blood on Your Hands" paint. And precipitously and predictably, the right, as well as the entire like New York liberal political establishment, like New York Democrats, even progressives, Jamal Bowman came out, and they've all condemned it. They've all called it anti-Semitic, and not all of them, but like many of them have called it anti-Semitic. Some have simply said like this is just a bad choice. This is a terrible decision. It's dumb. It grants legitimacy to a faction that we disagree with. Brad Lander made a pretty good criticism. I'm gonna read it. I'm not gonna pull it up on stream. Actually, I will. Let me pull up like the good criticisms, right? So like first off, look, I will say like it's incautious. If you are an activist and you are protesting a Jewish congressman who has joined an objectively racist witch hunt against a colleague who is overwhelmingly popular in his district, don't vandalize his office. Just don't do it. It's not worth it. It's not worth the fucking. It's not worth the. It is simply not worth what it is going to do in terms of the optics. But oh shit, I got blocked. Wait, who blocked me? Wait, this is someone I don't know, right? Yeah, some Israeli who quote tweeted Rashida Tlaib defending From the River to the Sea and tagged Elon Musk saying this account is calling for genocide, which, as you've stated today, violates your terms. I basically my response to it was like, this is giving the energy of, officer sir, I think my neighbor is a communist, which I don't regret. I'm sorry. I didn't I said I'm done mincing my words, but actually I did kind of mince my words, because what I had to say was a little more direct a comparison that I wouldn't make. I'm impressed that not impressed. I'm disappointed that Richie Torres has not blocked me yet. But you know, oh well. What was the? All right, that's Jumaane Williams. Jumaane Williams had a really bad. Jumaane Williams had a surprisingly bad response. Brad Lander had an okay response, but I think it was attackable. I think Chiose had the best, Chiose had the best response to what happened. Yes. Should I read my own tweet? I'll pull up Bowman's tweet as well. You know, I'll pull up Bowman's tweet and then I'll just read my response to it off stream. So we'll do Assembly Member. Yes, Assembly Member Osei's criticism first. So yeah. So here's what the original tweet was. This is what Rep. Dan Goldman and staff confronted when they showed up to work today, is a direct result of speaking out against anti-Semitism, not true, and supporting Israel's right to self-defense. Again, right to self-defense is a fucking dog whistle. Sorry. Defacing his office is not a form of protest. It is a deplorable crime. It is a form of protest. It is a crime. It's not deplorable. It just was not a politically smart move. If you look at the Jesus Christ, stop it. If you look at it says Free Palestine, Let Gaza Live, Blood on Your Hands. Now, let's be clear. If you were to put this on just a Jewish-owned business, or if you were to put it on a synagogue or a Jewish community center, that is unequivocally, absolutely 100% anti-Semitism. It is 100% a hate crime. Because what you are doing is you are associating members of the Jewish community who have no political affiliation with what is going on in Gaza. You are associating members of the Jewish community with the Israeli government. That is wrong, it is demented, it is despicable, and it's anti-Semitic. Dan Goldman is not a politically unaffiliated member of the Jewish community. Dan Goldman, religious background notwithstanding, is a deeply AIPAC-funded, DMFI-funded, let's just say a pro-Israel PAC-funded person who got elected off 26% of the vote in a massively split primary. He is massively unpopular in his district, and he represents a disproportionately progressive district as a non-progressive person. 60% of the district voted for a more progressive candidate than Dan Goldman, and he won because of a split primary and no ranked choice voting in the federal election primary. He has voted for every single resolution supporting Israel and condemning, I think he voted, I want to say he voted against, let me look it up actually, House resolution condemning protest. Disavowing anti-Semitism, support for terrorists. There's no way he didn't vote for this, considering the way he voted on everything else. HRS 798. I don't want to go into HR 798. Protecting America's meatpacking workers. What? HRES 798. Protest. Go up track. All right. 396 to 23. There's no fucking way he didn't vote for this. He's not one of the 23. Fuck Richie Torres, dude. Statistically. Oh, right, Richie Torres. I forgot to talk about this. Richie Torres accidentally voted no. And Richie Torres is he beats out anybody for the most vicious pro-Israel attack dog. He has received hundreds of thousands of dollars in every election, which for a congressional district is a lot of money. He's received hundreds of thousands of dollars in PAC and Super PAC money, in pro-Israel PAC and Super PAC money. They're his third or second biggest contributor behind real estate and maybe one other industry. Yeah, I just want to double check that Goldman voted for this, but of course he did. Yeah, of course he did. So he voted for a House resolution condemning literal peaceful protests. He also voted to censure Rashida Tlaib, which was it was just a racist witch hunt against the only Palestinian American member of Congress. Rashida Tlaib basically defended the phrase "from the river to the sea," which is a Palestinian liberation term. It's also a term that's used by Hamas. It's also a term that's used by anti-Semites. But by that same logic, Israel has a right to defend itself is objectively a racist term and should be condemned also by House resolution because it is 100% a dog whistle for genocide. There is no logic that says "from the river to the sea" is a genocidal phrase that doesn't also implicate Israel has a right to defend itself. Period. End of story. 100%. Right? Now, I will say that Israel has a right to defend itself is a dog whistle. It's not objectively always a dog whistle. It's a phrase that I don't think that proponents of Palestinian liberation should use, because I think that the term ubiquitously in America has been associated with the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, or at least as a coded term justifying the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. But you can't say the same thing about "from the river to the sea." "From the river to the sea" has a long history of being stigmatized in Jewish communities, and 100%, I carry room and space for trying to detach the phrase from that meaning, but it is also very, very, very heavily rooted in Palestinian liberation struggle, and the only way that you can create more weight to the Jewish interpretation of a Palestinian liberation slogan than it does for the actual Palestinian liberationists is by inherently implying that Palestinian voices don't matter in the equation, right? So the idea that Rashida Tlaib, a Palestinian American who has grown up in a Palestinian culture, is trying to defend the fact that "from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free," has always been a call for the liberation of the regions of Gaza, West Bank, and historically the Golan Heights, though that's gone, that is not the original meaning of the phrase, and that is not a meaning of the phrase that deserves to be reclaimed by the liberation movements, considering the fact that the overwhelming, constant, consistent majority and lion's share of the violence has been committed against the Palestinian people. It's ludicrous that she shouldn't be allowed to claim that phrase, right? It's insane. So yeah, it's racism, pure and simple, right? And she was also censured for, like, I don't know, saying that, like, insisting that it was an Israeli rocket that blew up Al-Awda Hospital, which, like, at this point, like, I have no idea what the hell's going on with that situation. What I do know is that the primary piece of evidence that was cited by Israel and the U.S. and Canada, or I don't know about the U.S. and Canada, but, like, the U.S. and probably the U.S. and definitely by Israel, was, like, that video of the rocket. And that analysis was completely debunked by the New York Times. Despite the fact that the New York Times, another writer for the New York Times, continued to tout that evidence as, like, or not that evidence, but the claims that rooted mostly from that evidence, touted those claims as being inherently believable or true, that it was most likely an Islamic Jihad or Hamas rocket that misfired and hit the hospital. So, like, it's a cesspool, but, like, yeah, so she claimed that it was an Israeli rocket that leveled Al-Awda Hospital, which, like, the damage seemed to have been less than was originally claimed, but, like, also, I don't know what happened there. What I do know is that, like, there is one faction that, like, routinely bombs hospitals, routinely bombs schools and refugee camps, and had attacked, I think, that hospital. Definitely has bombed a hospital since, has been bombing a hospital since, and it was considered, like, ridiculous or ludicrous that we would jump to conclusions that Israel bombed the hospital when it's completely within their MO, right? And that's what she's being censured for. She's being censured for not immediately retracting or not immediately rolling back or backpedaling on the notion that, like, the 6,001st bomb that was dropped on a civilian target happened to be the one that wasn't dropped by Israel, which, again, has not been demonstrated true, but, like, at the same time, like, it's ridiculous, right? Of course a Palestinian is going to think that after 6,000 bombs, the 6,001st bomb was probably dropped by Israel as well. So she was censured for that as, like, disinformation, and then she was censured for, like, trying to reclaim a Palestinian liberation slogan. It was racist. It was a witch hunt. And Dan Goleman voted for that. And he represents a district that is much more progressive than he is. And he represents a district that contains an entire university campus. Like, one of the 2 or 3 biggest private universities in all of New York, right? I think it's Columbia, Cornell, and NYU. And all of NYU. I'm pretty sure, yeah, he presides over, like, all of the main campus of NYU. Maybe a little bit is covered in Jerry Nadler's district, but I don't even think so. I don't care enough to look it up, but, like, between him and Jerry Nadler, they cover all of NYU, right? And I think Nadler's probably a little smarter about it, which is probably why he didn't vote to censor Rashida Tlaib. I don't think Jerry Nadler actually, like, has the remotest sense of a conscience about, like, actually censoring Tlaib, because Jerry Nadler's very much from, like, the New York Democratic old guard. Like, he's a little smarter than other establishment Dems his age. Like, he's a little smarter than Carolyn Maloney, which is why he, like, won. He's probably a little smarter. He just has better political instincts, which is probably why he didn't, like, join in on that witch hunt. It's probably going to help him down the road. But, like, but the point is, Dan Goleman presides over NYU, right? Like, you censor a member of the squad, you vote to censure a member of the squad who is the singular member of her ethnicity in Congress, and you preside over one of the most liberal, one of the most progressive, like, leftist breeding institutions in your state. This is the shit that's going to happen. It's going to happen, right? And it's not about your name. It's not about the fact that your last name is Goldman. It's not about the fact that you're Jewish. Which still, you see this name. This is when I say you see this name, this is a stereotypically Jewish name, obviously, right? When you see that your congressman is Jewish, this is something that you probably want to skip doing because the optics of it are awful, right? But the point is that, like, his religious background notwithstanding, Dan Goldman has done more than enough to precipitate this kind of response. And in fact, I would say that if not for the fact that he was Jewish and the optics were terrible, I am completely, let's say, agnostic, ambivalent to this, because I don't want to endorse the committing. Listen, don't commit crimes, all right? Crimes are bad. No crime. But, like, in the list of crimes that I oppose, this is extremely low on the list, right? The reason I oppose doing it is that he happens to be Jewish, and one, like, generally, yes, I think there are certain forms of protest that you should be a little more tempered about when the target is Jewish. I think Dan Goldman has been odious enough on the topic of Israel-Palestine that I don't really extend that charitability or courtesy to him. But on the flip side, the optics of it are just terrible. And you're giving, like, free news cycle fuel. But, like, just don't do this, right? But once again, I will not tolerate arguments that Dan Goldman has not done enough atrocious things, especially considering the progressive bona fides of the district he represents, that had a I will not tolerate arguments that had a non-Jewish member of Congress done what Dan Goldman has done in Congress since this crisis started, that they would not have also been vandalized by this kind of constituency, right? That's not, like, I can't say they for sure would have. It could always, like, it's entirely possible that these were anti-Semites. It's also entirely possible it's a fucking false flag, right? But I'm not going to make that argument. I'm going to take it at face value, right? I'm going to presume it's a bunch of dumbass college lefties who got overzealous and don't understand that, like, you know, you have to account for the possibility that something you're doing is anti-Semitic, even if you don't realize it, which I don't think it was here. But B, more importantly, you have to account for the fact that, like, everything you do is going to be viewed through the lens of people who are desperate and foaming at the mouth to call anything you do anti-Semitic, who are already calling everything you do anti-Semitic, and you have to avoid giving any kind of optical legitimacy to that, right? But as far as, like, the moral calculation of it, presuming that, like, vandalism wasn't a crime, like, Danny Boy's done more than enough to deserve this kind of a response, right? Like, I do think he should be, like, pestered and harangued at restaurants. I think he is definitely one of, if I think Elizabeth Warren should be pestered at restaurants, I think Bernie Sanders should not be able to enjoy private life for the way that he has been, right? Like, I totally support protesters going up and, like, preventing public figures and members of Congress from enjoying the luxuries of, like, private life, going to Michelin star restaurants. Fuck that. No. You support a genocide, you don't get that shit, right? Like, that stuff you should absolutely do. But the problem is that you can't do that now because there's a giant victim narrative that has been written around Dan Goldman, who has been objectively odious on this issue. And it's because of the vandalism, right? So he shouldn't have done it. And that's what Chiose said. You can be critical of Israel and support the liberation of the Palestinian people without vandalizing the office of a Jewish elected official. Please don't do this. Now, he's not saying that this was an anti-Semitic incident. But what he's saying is you shouldn't vandalize the office of a Jewish elected official. You just shouldn't do it. Don't do it. It's bad optics. At its very best, it's bad optics. And I am actually taking it right now at its very best. It is possible it was anti-Semitism. Like, it's always possible it's anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a fucking scourge. It's a cancer upon our society. But, like, I don't think that's the fairest conclusion to draw. Brad Lander had also a fair but slightly worse thing. You know, Congressman Dan Goldman's office, 9th Street, 9th neighborhood, was, wow, doxing. You literally, first off, reporting Brad Lander for doxing Jewish people was vandalized yesterday. This is a rotten crime. It's a crime. I don't think it's, like, particularly, like, if not for the bad optics of Dan Goldman being Jewish, like, I just don't think it's all that bad. And also pretty dumb. True. It did not advance the cause of Palestinian safety or freedom. True. I think it set it back. Instead, it just confirmed many Jews' fears and stoked more division. Confirmed is a bad word to use. I think it played into many Jews' fears and stoked more division, right? I think it played into Jews' fears It, even if the way in which it played into said fears is not like sound, the fears themselves are valid. The fear of anti-Semitism is of course valid, right? And you don't want to be playing into that. Any activist should always, any pro-Palestine activist should always, especially when they're interacting with a Jewish member of Congress or a Jewish public figure, your question should be beyond the point of asking, like, is this act anti-Semitic? And let's presume it's not. You have to be willing to ask, is this action going to make Jews feel less, Jews who are sympathetic to my cause feel less safe in participating in my cause, right? And obviously, if that's a valid fear, if that's a valid inflammation of their fear, it's something you shouldn't do. Even if it's an invalid inflammation, or if it's a lens of their fear which is in itself invalid and it's not something that's reasonable, but it just happens to be the political reality, then of course the question becomes like, is it more trouble than it's worth? This is more trouble than it's worth. I'm sorry. It's just more trouble than it's worth. There is no outcome to this that does not alienate more Jewish allies than the remotest sense of benefit that it's going to give to you, right? Just save it for the Gentiles. Save it for people who look like me. And there's plenty of people who look like me in vessels of power who are not fucking doing their part. Like, I give you full resources to within the realm of the law, because I don't support the commission of crimes. But in the hypothetical state where vandalism is not a crime, I think you should absolutely vandalize Indian Congress people's offices. Only if it's legal, which I don't think it is legal in any states, but just on the off chance that it is legal in some states, in those states, I think it's okay to do it. Because honestly, fuck Indian Congress members who haven't called for a ceasefire. Real kind of. All right, let's talk about the dog shit. Jamal Bowman. No, let's do Jumaane Williams first. Jamal Bowman had a really bad one. Jumaane Williams had a pretty bad one. We're deeply troubled by the vandalism that took place at Daniel Goleman's office. We can only imagine the chilling effect on the Congress member and staff. This type of intimidation cannot be accepted. We can only imagine the chilling effect on the Congress member and staff is actually kind of accurate, because you can only imagine it because it doesn't actually exist. This has no chilling effect. Has no chilling effect on Dan Goldman's agenda. This is the crucial coal in the Titanic that allows it to avoid the iceberg, right? Actually, I don't think coal helps you steer, so I imagine coal would have caused them to run into the iceberg. But the point is, this is full steam ahead. Coal in the ship that is not the Titanic, that is not about to run into the iceberg, but instead is about to go zoom very fast and get exactly to its destination. That is what this is. This is absolute lifeblood fuel for the hardline pro-Israel agenda. The chilling effect will be on support for the pro-Palestine movement. There will be a material harm incurred, especially within the New York community, right? The New York the New York normie community, right? People who are I support Israel, but I think what they're doing is awful, right? Acts like this that can easily be marketed to them as being blatantly anti-Semitic, because they have all of the optical auspices of anti-Semitism, are just going to turn those people off, and it's going to be bad. And it also creates a snowball that there's a cohort of those people that will then get reframed to thinking of all pro-Palestine activism as this being a marker of all of pro-Palestine activism. That this is the real indicator of what the underlying movement is, right? Which I think this is an extreme indicator of what the movement is, but I also don't think this attack was anti-Semitic, right? To the extent that that's the case, I do think that this is indicative of the movement, of it's a movement without the best political impulses, but activist movements aren't supposed to have political impulses, right? But unfortunately, this, you kind of have to know better than this. But there are going to be normies in New York who are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, but are also just generally think that anti-Semitism is bad, but also aren't super duper friggin' versed in what is what, right? that they're going to be turned off to this, and that's bad. That's really bad. Yeah. So the chilling effect is not going to. Yeah, we can only imagine. Yes, you can only imagine because it doesn't exist. Is my point, right? That was pretty good. Jamal Bowman's response was just disgusting. I think Jamal Bowman is just like when you're in Congress, there is just a level of political capital, and obviously Bowman is not as integrated a member of the squad that I think he is willing to isolate himself from vessels of power, right? Like I think AOC is adjacent enough to Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar that like it's kind of like the negative PR associated with her, inherently associated with her, almost like immunizes her from the implications of not like forcefully condemning this. I'm sure she said something. Though like if she didn't, that's a brave ass move. This is AOC. Let's do Rep AOC. I'm sure her Congress account said something. She did not. Okay. So yeah, I think that like someone like AOC can get away with not condemning this because it's like she has a brand where the negative PR is already intrinsic, so people aren't going to like shun her or cut ties with her because it's like anyone who is doing political trade with AOC, who is working with AOC in Congress, has already found a way to fit her image into their political like portfolio, right? So she's not expected to condemn this. I think Jamal Bowman has a lot less of that luxury because he's not so closely adjacently associated with the squad. It's like there's like a weird liberation in being like a progressive woman of color, where it's just like you've already dealt with all of the negative associations and negative PR is packed into the deal. So like there's less responsibility there almost, but like Jamal Bowman doesn't have that luxury because there are vessels of political capital he has access to and certain kinds of negative PR he doesn't deal with that then he has to actually protect that image, right? So I feel like that's what this is. The statement is, I'm deeply disappointed to see this as a targeted attack on the office of one of my colleagues, and especially a Jewish colleague. This is just plain anti-Semitism. It might be. I'm not going to say it's objectively not, but like it's not. I don't think it's reasonable to say this is just plain anti-Semitism. I'm sorry. Like there's just nothing to indicate that. And Dan Goldman, like I said, has been such a ghoul and so comprehensively odious that the question is, would a non-Jewish member of Congress be treated this way for doing exactly the same shit, right? Now, what I would say is a non-Jewish member of Congress would 100% deserve this level of backlash, minus the caveat that, of course, it's illegal and you shouldn't do crimes. But shut up, Discord. What's going on here? That the so like a non-Jewish member of Congress would 100% be responsible for and like merit in a video game this kind of backlash. Now I can't guarantee that a non-Jewish member of Congress would have dealt with that, and to the extent that there's a chance that they would not have had their office vandalized for the same shit, it is an anti-Semitic incident. But I think it would have happened, right? I don't think it's reasonable to say it wouldn't have happened. This is a very, very, very progressive district. And also, it's important to note that Dan Goldman voted to censure Rashida Tlaib. Dan Goldman presides over the majority of NYU as a district, an extremely progressive college district, right? It's not the only part of his district. There's also Brooklyn. But, like, it's a very progressive district. A lot of the people in his district are students. Even in Brooklyn, right? We're talking about like Kings County. Kings County is super duper like super duper like white hipster. There's so many leftists, so many socialists in the area. Like, Dan Goldman voted to censure Rashida Tlaib. Jerry Nadler, who presides over a very similar, like demographically, a very similar young population, did not vote to censure Rashida Tlaib. There was no such attack against Jerry Nadler's office. Nadler's office was not vandalized. Goldman's office was vandalized, and there was a significant difference in the way that they voted on issues regarding Israel, right? I'm sure Nadler voted for the, what's it called? What is this? Calvin and Hobbes, Noyce. Hold on. GovTrack US. Wait, hold on. Condemning protests, HRES 798. Oh, is that it? 798? There we go. I'm sure Nadler voted for it. There's only 23 no votes. I can't imagine. Yeah, Nadler voted for that. He even voted for that. He didn't vote to censure Tlaib. Right? Like Nadler's office was not vandalized. There's like it feels there are so many there's such a strong differential diagnosis to the theory that this was an anti-Semitic attack that I just don't think it is like I just don't think it's a reasonable claim. I just don't think it's a reasonable claim. Again, like I will not write off anti-Semitism in any case scenario whatsoever. But here, it is very important to say we have to have a threshold. We have to have a standard for calling things anti-Semitic, because when you commit to calling something anti-Semitic, you are accepting the reality of a serious chilling effect that it is going to have on the pro-Palestine movement, right? That is the political reality we live in, is that if you care about anti-Semitism, which you should, and if you don't, you need to shut the fuck up or educate yourself. Or educate yourself. But if you care about anti-Semitism, you have to have a threshold. If you care about anti-Semitism and Palestinian lives, right? Which, quite frankly, if you care about anti-Semitism and you don't care about Palestinian lives, you are ushering in an outcome in which anti-Semitism is going to be like a horrible reality. It's just going to be a scourge on this earth. Anyway, but that's a different. I watch Majority Report for that for that commentary. But like, there has to be a threshold, because every time that anti-Semitism is called out, there is going to be a chilling effect on the pro-Palestine movement, on support for the pro-Palestine movement, specifically anti-Semitism. Perceived from the left, perceived from pro-Palestine protesters, but even anti-Semitism that occurs at all in this political climate, right? Like, if some skinhead goes and puts a Nazi swastika on a fucking synagogue, that's going to get associated with the pro-Palestine movement. Sorry, I keep bumping the table. That's going to happen, right? But we will call that out, right? Of course we'll call that out. And also, it's objectively a right-wing crime. But when there is a case of left-wing anti-Semitism, and it's something that does occur, let Gaza live, but free Palestine from the river to the sea, putting any slogan on a synagogue. I will say, from the river to the sea, if you put that on a synagogue, if you put that on a Jewish community center, that fuels the notion that from the river to the sea is an anti-Jewish slur, or it's an anti-Jewish phrase, right? So like those are like ostensibly, like, at least in terms of their PR, those are left-wing anti-Semitic hate incidents. And you have to call those out, right? But you have to have a certain level of understanding, like, there's a good chance that this is anti-Semitism, and because of that, I'm going to call it out. There are cases in which it's possible. It is possible that this was just Jew hate. It's possible. But there's not, like, there's just, like I said, there's too strong a differential diagnosis. There is an adjacent district presided over by a Jewish congressman. It is also a district presiding over the same university campus, or at least the same neighborhood of that university campus. That congressperson was not as odious on this issue as Dan Goldman was. also that congressperson is significantly more popular. Jerry Nadler was elected with over 40% of the was nominated with over 40% of the vote, and there were 3 people in the primary, right? Like Suraj Patel was was an absolute like joke in this election. I forgot what his final percentage was. New York 12 primary 2022. Ashmi Sheth. Is it Chet? No, Sheth. No, not this one. Yeah, look, Jerry Nadler got 55.4% of the vote in the primary, right? This is a guy with majority approval. He's popular. Wow, he wiped the fucking floor with Carolyn Maloney. Man, Suraj Patel, I'm so glad. This is a bit of a rant, but like I am honestly so glad that this guy's career did not take off. Like this man like had like Pete Buttigieg, like this man had future Richie Torres written all over his face. What a political opportunist. I don't think he believes a single thing, honestly. I don't know who Ashmi is because this is not my district, but Manhattan Young Dems, League of Women Voters, that also tells me nothing. Nadler was endorsed by the Working Families Party, but like that also tells me nothing because like climate activist, cool, based. Former regulator, based. All right, yeah, this seems like a standard, like fairly progressive. Like honestly, she's not Suraj Patel, so I would support her campaign in 24. What was I saying? Right, the differential diagnosis. Like, Jesus, I'm so fucking bad with staying on fucking topic. Stay on topic. Jerry Nadler has been way less awful on the topic of Israel. He has over 50%. He got nominated with over 50% of the vote, and obviously wiped the floor with his Republican opponent. That's a given. I think the primary vote is what matters. But even so, it's not just how popular he is in his district. How popular is he in other districts, in neighboring districts, in New York 10, right? Dan Goldman, I cannot emphasize this enough. 60% of the primary vote was for a, not just ostensibly, for a demonstrably more progressive candidate than Daniel Goldman. 26% of the district, 25.9%. I rounded up because I want to be generous to him. 26%, 25.9%. You know what? Fuck him. 25.9% of the district voted for him, and he won the primary. Because that 60% was split. Thanks, Mondaire. Thanks, Carlina Rivera. I blame them because the Working Families Party endorsed quickly once the new primary was announced. They said Yuli New seems to be the candidate that has the best chance of winning here. We are going to coalesce, and we think everyone should coalesce with us. And the thing, and every single other candidate told the Working Families Party to go fuck themselves. I think, was it Carlina? No, it was Mondaire Jones, who was basically like, no, the Working Families Party endorsed me. And they're like, no, they endorsed you before the redistricting. After the redistricting, it's a new political calculation. So my point is that Goldman is extremely unpopular in his district. He is not a popular candidate. He eked his way by he spent as much money, not he spent, but like, he spent $4 million of his own money on his own campaign. That's insane. Unfathomable amount of money to spend on a congressional district. Out of your own pocket. And the special interests behind him, the pro-Israel lobby donated a pittance to him. But what they did do was they spent $400,000 in attack money. And they spent it on one candidate. They spent it attacking Yuli New. They spent it painting her as an anti-Semite. The amount of money that went into a comprehensive smear campaign against his number one opponent, and he finished 3% ahead of her, with 26% of the vote, and he got elected. This is not a popular congressman. And he has made decisions, especially since the start of this crisis, that are a giant fuck you to his constituents. This is a very progressive district. Like I said, 60% voted for a more progressive candidate. If he's getting vandalized, it's just because he's historically unpopular, right? At least Jerry Nadler and Carolyn Maloney, like they consistently beat their opposition. The only exception is, of course, Carolyn Maloney like barely beat Suraj Patel, and like originally I was kind of regretful of that, but I think I'm actually kind of happy about that. I've come around to the idea that like we should be more rigorous and more selective with young challengers, and that we should be more selective about young primary challengers to older Congress people, because there will be other opportunities. But if like a Suraj Patel, who is extremely sus and seems better than Carolyn Maloney, and it's just like, yeah, sure, get him in there. That's kind of the attitude that I used to have. But like if he gets elected and has incumbency advantage and roots himself in, that's a whole nother generation. It's like the Supreme Court, right? It's a whole other generation of institutional power for yet another mediocre Democrat. So I think that like movement progressives should be the ones that we throw our support behind, and it's actually perfectly okay to say, you know what, I don't really trust this guy, and this person's getting kind of old. I think that future primaries are only going to be more successful. I'm going to wait for like a good candidate, right? Especially in New York, where like it's like a baseline to be in things like the Medicare for All caucus, where it's like there's a baseline level of progressivism in the federal New York Democratic Party. State party is different, but yeah, I think Dan Goldman's office got vandalized because everyone fucking hates him. And the reason everyone fucking hates him is because he doesn't represent the values of the district. I think it's really that simple. I think his office got vandalized because he voted to censure a Palestinian American congresswoman who is more popular among his constituents than he is. In fact, I'd love to see numbers. I don't think there are numbers out there, but like I will conjecture. I don't know that for sure, but I have very strong reason to believe that Rashida Tlaib is more popular in Dan Goldman's district, because Dan Goldman got 26% of the vote. And I know that district. I lived in that district for the longest time. Like, there are so many progressives, so many socialists. Obviously there are plenty of pro-Israel New Yorkers there as well. It's the Village. But like Kings County, I don't think Kings County is unless like no, like Crown Heights is way further in. Like but like what? Yeah, like I don't know, like fucking yeah, like Kings County is like fucking hipster country. Like there's so much college blood there, right? Like I'm sure that there are Israel hardliner Jews living in the district. I'm sure that there was a significant there was a Orthodox population that definitely turned out to vote for him. And again, not because he was Jewish, but because he had pro-Israel money behind him, right? And also because he spent $4 million and like $500,000 behind him attacking Yulia New as an anti-Semite, right? Like, and that was for her views on Israel. I'm pretty sure. I can't remember exactly what it was, but like it must have been. Like, yeah, I can only imagine that like Rashida Tlaib popularity. New York Times. There's no way that this number exists. What does from the river to the sea? God. By the way, fuck the Anti-Defamation League. Like literally, that's another topic that we have to get into another night. But like, I'll tease it out a little bit. But like, holy shit, has it ever been more clear that there is no political partisan delineation distinction where like there is no political faction that is the official against anti-Semitism faction, right? Obviously, the right was never opposed to anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is the lifeblood of conservative philosophy, right? From basic Christian evangelism, which is the idea that like Jews need to be expelled from the United States and the diaspora back to Israel so that the rapture can finally happen and 2/3 of them can burn in eternal hellfire, right? Like it like an essentially Jew hating ideology, like not like not like Christianity at large, though argument could be made, but like Christian evangelism for sure, right? Not just that, but like, you know, neo-Nazis, skinheads, the Jewish question, like great replacement theory, like these are like not like Nazi ideologies like at the core of like the culture war as well, right? And then obviously anti-Semitism exists on the left because the hatred for Israel oftentimes translates to unconscious and also sometimes conscious bias against Jews, which is horrible and needs to be fought, and it needs to be corrected and needs to be fixed in terms of like, you know, educate the people you can educate, cast out the people who obviously don't operate in good faith. And I think those two are mutually exclusive. I think if you are a leftist operating in good faith, there is no anti-Semitism you can harbor that you cannot be educated out of you. And if you can't be educated out of you, you're not a good faith leftist, right? Because ultimately your leftism has to come from a place of compassion, a place of pluralism, and a place of like belief in those basic core values of like, no, this is a group for everyone, right? And if you're resistant to critiques of your own behavior, then you don't actually believe in those values. But like the notion that like there was this like the notion that like there was an ADL kind of liberal to light center right establishment group that their core agenda was fighting anti-Semitism has been completely demolished by their behavior in the past 6 weeks, right? The fact that it started off with them unlisting libs of TikTok, which is an objectively like not like it is a platform that regularly elevates ideologies and conspiracy theories that necessitate the elevation of Nazi propaganda. You cannot have the kinds of culture war narratives that are pushed by libs of TikTok, such as like, you know, they're coming to train your kids. Like this all like the notion that there is a radical trans activist like George Soros funded like radical cultural postmodern neo-Marxist agenda to trans your children has to root back to there is a lizard cabal that is controlling them and trying to do it in order to like pussify Western culture, right? It has to come back to the replacement of Western culture, which requires the existence of a high IQ minority group, which there is one that exists that can be vilified as such. Now, I mean, there are Indians as well, but like Indians don't like, the problem is there's like 1.5 billion of us and we're not an easy enough target. But like, and also it's in many ways an underdeveloped country which fights against the narrative, right? Which cuts against the narrative. Like you need a social group of which there are 13 million people, or 13 million people is an old number. Global Jewish population, I'm sure it's more. 18 million, I think. At 2023, it was extended at 16 million with the addition of the enlarged Jewish population. So the enlarged Jewish population is probably what like a Nazi would use. So it'll probably say 20 million people, which is a tiny portion of the global population. But that's what they need, right? They need an elite. But that's the only way that any of these theories hold water, right? Like anti-Semitism is a necessary component of every single conspiracy theory that libs of TikTok pushes. And the ADL unlisted it as a hate group, unlisted it as a hate page, as a hate account, because of the conservative backlash, right? They're fucking spineless. So like when Elon Musk, let's find it. Elon Musk actual truth tweet. everyone's seen the tweet, okay? Everyone's seen the tweet. Fuck off. Like, he said, you have said the actual truth in response to, like, an objective great replacement theory. Like, not just a great replacement theory post. A great replacement theory and the Jews are responsible post. And Elon Musk, basically, he didn't just retweet it. He said, you have said this is true. This is true. He said, the great replacement theory is true, and it is the fault of Jews. That's what he said. It's not verbatim what he said. He said, you have said the truth to someone who said that. Okay? And then he made a post saying, from the river to the sea is now a bannable phrase. And decolonization is now a bannable phrase because it calls for, it's usually called to genocide, which I think there's some latent Rhodesian trauma that probably informs that decision. And the ADL celebrated it. They came out and said, "We are so grateful to Elon Musk for." Hold on, let me find this. I don't want premium. Fuck off. ADL. I hope I'm not blocked. Oh shit, there were neo-Nazi demonstrations in Wisconsin? Damn. Then you probably shouldn't fucking elevate the richest anti-Semite in the world. But oh, it was Greenblatt. Greenblatt was the one who... Yep, here it is. God, what a fucking spineless piece of shit. Jonathan Greenblatt is the CEO of ADL. Jesus. Oh, man. It used to be that, like... I'll do this later. This is an important and welcome move by Elon Musk. I appreciate this leadership in fighting hate. Decolonization from the river sea necessarily implied suicide. Clear calls for extreme violence are against our terms of service and will result in suspension. This was after Elon Musk elevated and heralded and praised as true an objective GAQ post. Like, not just an explicit 100% all out Jews are demographically replacing the West. Like, and this piece of shit, this cynical motherfucker, comes out and says, oh yeah, thank you, Elon Musk. The reason for this is that there comes a point, because Israel is a clear ethno-nationalist settler colonial project, who's like, and I'm talking about, obviously, like, there are offshoots of self-reported Zionism that believe that, you know, it's not about, we don't believe in the ethno-state, we don't actually believe in having control of any of Eretz Israel, that we even believe in a one-state solution, but like Zionism is just the belief that like there should be some level of community among Jewish people where we can find safety within each other and that we deserve to be safe in the world, right? Like there are interpretations of Zionism, but like ultimately, like, the term Zionism, its origins do come from a settler colonial ideology, right? Like, so, like, at its very core, at its very founding, Israel has always had an element of being a settler colonial project, the same way that the U.S. does, right? The same way that... there's too many caveats for me to compare aspects of India and Pakistan, but, like... And, like, there comes a point where when your ideology involves defending the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, you have to choose between disavowing or accepting the allyship of people who support the existence of Israel because their primary goal is the expulsion of diaspora Jews from whatever country they're in, right? And this was the decision when, what's his name, Mike Hagee or something Hagee, John Hagee, James Hagee, Jim Hagee, Forsyth, let's call him Forsyth Hagee, that fucking Christian Zionist who believed in the rapture, right? Who said, you know, Jews have to burn in hellfire so that we can all be saved. Like a virulent anti-Semite was allowed to speak at the March for Israel, right? It's because at a certain point, there is a choice that has to be made between your support for unfettered Israeli Zionism and the total expulsion of Palestinians from the land and your opposition to anti-Semitism. Because you're going to have to choose some bedfellows, right? And this is what Greenblatt's doing here, is that, like, he doesn't care that Elon Musk hates Jews. And Elon Musk does hate Jews. And Elon Musk is almost definitely a white supremacist, right? Is Elon Musk a Nazi? Well, you combine the two together, it's kind of hard not to be, right? Like, it's not definitely true that Elon Musk is a Nazi, but he has given enough evidence for us to presume that Elon Musk has Nazi or Nazi-adjacent views at the core of his ideology. I just think that's not... I don't think there's a fair way to read this otherwise, right? But Greenblatt doesn't care, because ultimately his priority is not fighting global anti-Semitism. It could be sincere. He could genuinely believe that global anti-Semitism is an intrinsic part of the world and that the only way to be safe from it is to establish a nation state, an ethno-state of Israel. It's delusional, because if Israel successfully ethnically cleanses Palestine, I think it's going to be an absolute disaster for them. The political support for them on the national stage, on the international stage, is waning. The political support for them in the U.S. Congress is waning. There is a growing list of ceasefire advocates. There's a growing list of supporters of conditioned aid. This level of support for Israel is not going to last. There isn't popular support for it. Politicians who are clinging to it are going to pay a hefty price. Like, they can protect the support for the next few years, but, like, this is not going to last, especially off the eve of this much killing and slaughter. I think there's a lot of political miscalculations that have been made here. Or maybe it's just desperation, where it's just like, there's no way out of this, right? This is the desperate lashing out of a dying ideology, which is like the radical maximalist position on Zionism, right? So, like, to that extent, it's kind of just like a kamikaze attempt to just, like, do whatever you can, right, to establish whatever superiority you can in the time you have. But yeah, like, this makes Jews less safe, objectively, right? Don't interpret this as me saying that, like, objectively, that, like, support for Israel is morally responsible for the existence of anti-Semitism, right? That's, like, I don't believe in collective punishment. Or at least that it's uniquely, right? I don't believe in excludable moral culpability. But when you engage in a behavior that you know is going to lead to more anti-Semitism, and the behavior itself is just objectively unethical, you're also responsible for the precipitated effects that you know are going to happen. You continue to engage in the unethical behavior that's unethical toward another group, but you also know it's going to come back to affect members of your group. You're responsible for that too. When you commit a war crime that causes members of a group that you claim to speak for to be in more danger, you're responsible for that as well. Which is not to say that, the anti-Semitism is deserved. It's obviously absolutely not. I think I made my position on that very clear. Like, but there's not shared responsibility. There's non-excludable multiple party responsibility. It's the same when it comes to October 7th, right? Like, Hamas are the ones who pulled the trigger. They are responsible for the murder of like 1,200 non-combatants and like and civilians. I would call them civilians. There's a lot of people who wouldn't call them civilians. I don't give a fuck. I don't care what you call them. Like, they're non-combatants. They don't deserve to be summarily executed. Like, even in a situation where you can justify like forcibly removing them from their homes and like, you know, only like there are the things that happen to them cannot be defended. I cannot be excused, cannot be defended. And in the same vein, but at the same time, Israel is responsible for the deaths, but because it's their job to defend. They took it on. They purported themselves as the defender of Israeli lives, and then they were the ones who were too busy ethnically cleansing the West Bank in order to protect their own civilians. So they are also responsible, right? Similarly, anti-Semites are the primary culpable party for anti-Semitism. And also, there is secondary culpability for fascists who attempt to run political cover for themselves by associating all of Israel with the global Jewish community, and in so doing, tell people who oppose Israel, if you oppose Israel, you oppose Jews. A portion of those people are going to take that to heart and genuinely think that their enemy is the global Jewish community. So Israel is as responsible for feeding into that narrative. And I think they want to, right? They want people to feel unsafe in the diaspora and move, right? Not everyone, obviously. They want global support. But ultimately, I don't think, I think Israel realizes that like their support from the U.S. is not necessarily coming from the Jewish population, right? So like this is bad, right? Obviously, it's eliminationist. It's extremely racist. It's extremely Islamophobic. It's extremely anti-Palestinian, and it treats Palestinian lives with a certain level of like disgusting like disregard. Like, they really genuinely view them as less than human. I should specify when I say they, I'm talking about supporters of nonstop Israeli incursion, right? I'm talking about including and especially non-Jewish supporters of Israel, right? I'm talking about the fucking Richie Torreses of the world. I'm talking about literally anybody who has said Israel has a right to defend itself and has not called for some level of like, you know, at least a humanitarian pause. But like, you view Palestinians as less. That's just the case. You know, it's definitely the case in terms of like Jonathan Greenblatt, but like secondarily, like it just makes Jews less safe, right? And I would oppose and fight anti-Semitism in any situation, right? And no matter what happened. But in a scenario in which Israel is successful in saddling Jewish identity with a necessary allegiance to Israel, and also saddling and completely coalescing Jewish identity and pro-Israel identity and Zionist identity, in a world in which Zionism and Judaism are successfully made synonymous, that is a world that precipitates a level of anti-Semitism that that cannot be stopped, right? That cannot be fought. How the fuck do you fight that? Yeah. And I think that's their survival gambit. I think what they're hoping is that they'll create a world in which, in order to fight anti-Semitism, you have to support Israel after it has long committed an ethnic cleansing. And that's scary as shit. And it's very, very, very dangerous for the Jewish community. I'm sorry. I don't know. So like ADL, proud supporter of anti-Semites, and it's very disappointing and so saddening for me to see like voices I used to respect in the political sphere who weren't like super ideologically left, but like were compassionate human beings, submit to the level of weaponization of trauma that has occurred. Like, I mean, obviously the discourse around aristocracy is going around, and I always really liked aristocracy, but like, this was, she always had a very like kind of, like measured, and not measured, but like contrarian and defensive stance on Israel-Palestine, where she didn't like the oversimplification of the issue, which it's a very morally simple issue. I'm sorry. But like, that's understandable. And I was just like, okay, whatever. I'll hold space for this. And I hope that eventually, like, you just are able to, like, you know, resolve that trauma and join us in opposing ethnic cleansing and genocide. And now she's just cheerleading it, which is really sad, because I don't think she operates in bad faith. I think this is a legitimately like such a level of trauma that has been weaponized by a kind of indoctrination that there seems to be no way out of it for her, to the point where she has also celebrated a admitted Nazi or like Nazi adjacent billionaire just amending the terms of service to fuck with pro-Palestine people, right? Like, as long as it helps facilitate an ethnic cleansing against Palestinians, like, that's, you know, we'll align with whoever we have to. That Jesus, 2 hours and 30 minutes. I have to go to bed. I have to eat. I gotta check my WoW tunes. I really shouldn't play WoW, but I won't. I probably won't. I'm probably gonna be good. Alright, thanks for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, I stream on YouTube. Click that subscribe button, see when I go live, or follow me on Twitch if you prefer to use Twitch chat emotes. Twitch.tv/Chantastic93.